Hello, welcome to Off the Shelf Reviews.
I'm Jess.
And I'm Gary. And today we're going to review and discuss Pitch Black, which came out in 2000, directed by David Twohy. I've been a big fan of this director's work,
Yes.
all the way back into Critters 2. He wrote the screenplay for that film, but he would also go on to do one of my favourite sort of sci-fi alien movies, The Arrival,
Yes,
with
very,
Charlie
very
Sheen
good.
in his more sober days.
I doubt he was sober, he just hit it better.
But David Twohy was also one of the men responsible for creating a draft script for Alien 3, when the studio were outsourcing it to multiple writers to come up with the idea. And David Twohy had the idea of having the aliens brought to a planet with a hive and a spaceship crashing onto the planet and trying to basically get off the planet from the alien nest. And when you realize that, you can see how much of Aliens has bled into this film.
Oh yes, the creatures, the aesthetic, it's all there. It's the darkness. Every Alien film echoes that kind of shadow in the darkness chasing you down a corridor.
Yes.
This film is the shadow incarnate. And the anti-hero, not lead, he's kind of co-lead of Riddick, played by Vin Diesel, is another shadow woven
Yes.
within the shadows. And that's it's good. It's a very alien, and I think you're probably right. That's why I think spiritually it's its own thing, but it's so drawn from Alien.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, the story follows Radha Mitchell, who plays Carolyn Fry, and she is a pilot of a transport ship which gets hit by a meteor shower which causes the ship to crash land into an alien planet. And the remaining survivors must fight for survival as a solar eclipse blocks out the sun and a creature emerges, which starts to pick them off one at a time.
You're not afraid of the dark, are you?
This was also Vin Diesel's breakout movie as well.
It was. I mean, this was predating Fast and Furious 1.
Yes, he had appeared in Steven Spielberg's Saving Private Ryan.
Yep, I remember that. It's funny how you have to pick through your memories for that, because he wasn't a standout performance in that, but he was good. I remember. It's funny with Vin. I think Vin's one of those actors who is under. I'm trying to word this politely, and it's not written. There isn't meant to be any rudeness about it. He understates himself in roles. He's very subtle, even in Groot.
Right.
And again, no. But joking aside with Groot, he is a man who doesn't overexpress, but there is acting going on, and you still get that. And I think at times he's viewed, because he's a big meathead-looking guy, as being that sort of stereotype, but he isn't so much. He's a bit more
we'd kind of had our 80s and 90s muscle-bound action
Yes.
heroes, and Vin Diesel was like the revival of that kind of bravado in a way.
Yeah.
But he is kind of, he has his one-liners, he has his quips, he has the visual appeal of those 90s, 80s action movie stars, but he is kind of very understated in this. Like you said, he's not the lead character.
No.
But he is. This film has three lead characters. This film almost has the perspective of these three unique characters, all that end up, fighting for survival and for screen time.
Well, you probably should talk about the main cast.
Sure.
Because you said the pilot, and obviously Riddick, obviously played by Vin Diesel, but then obviously we had the
Cole Hauser, who plays the bounty hunter, and those are the three kind of lead characters to this film.
There is a spiritual support, I think, in Keith David's character Abu. Who's the kind of priest on his pilgrimage to Mecca. Sorry, New Mecca.
Space Mecca.
Space Mecca. And he's the sort of spiritual judge, almost, because he's speaking gentle wisdoms through the film, and he is also sort of grounded. I think he is the fourth wheel, almost, because
For me, as much as I love Keith David, he has appeared in so many fantastic movies, he is really forgettable in this, and is, in my opinion, a complete non-character.
I don't know. I think he was playing it safely because, again, it's playing a regional ethnicity and religion he is not, I think.
Yeah.
Ring me up if you're not. You are, Keith. Sorry. But I think he is understated in a Riddick, kind of in a Vin Diesel sort of way, because he's more the spiritual counselor to the group. I do think his interactions are key with several members of the cast, where he kind of gives that. The Riddick's arc is touched by him, and some sense the redemption nature of kind of don't give up on God, don't give up on humanity, and then there's certain spiritual aspects I think he echoes into each of them. I think his presence as the priest, the Imram character, sort of fills something about this, because there is a spiritual morality being explored in this film that isn't super highfalutin kind of,
it's definitely,
but it's still there. It's still there.
It is there. I'll give you that.
Each of the characters has an arc. I think you're right that Keith David's character is the least developed of the other compared to the other three, because his loss of his students as the film goes on, shocker, people die. If you haven't seen it 20 years, you're slacking on us here. Shocks and horrors. But yeah, he has three kind of young students that are on this pilgrimage with him, and they all pass through the story in gruesome and entertaining ways. And he doesn't seem... It does get commented on him by Riddick in a conversation when they're talking about God. But he doesn't seem haunted by it. He seems to cope with it. But I think that is a spiritualism to him that kind of almost... He's playing to that. He deals with it quite well.
Sure.
Which I think in horror films we're used to people overreacting, shall we say, to death.
Yeah.
So I could argue that...
But then there is also a criticism of this film, is that once the ship does crash on the planet, the survivors are just like, okay, how do we get out of this? It's like they don't seem too phased. It's like this all happened to them before.
And that is an interest... But then again, maybe that's just because it's so...
far into the future.
And it's different. And that's the thing. We're so used to having films where it's like, ah! And the blonde runs off into the kind of straight into a kind of horrifying death. It's like, well, if she just doesn't run off, that happens once to the English, the antiques trader.
Yeah.
But nobody else really runs off into the dark like an idiot.
Panicking, yeah.
And that sort of makes sense.
Well, the film does a very good job of establishing these characters. This film is very character-driven, and that is one of the main draws to the film. That also makes it rewatchable as well, is that you like watching these characters develop and progress through the nightmare. I also really like the intro to the film. I think the visuals still look fantastic 20 years later.
Yeah, the whole spaceship.
The spaceship is great, and seeing, you know, the planet in the background and the meteor and the all of the debris in space and the lighting, it just looks fantastic. And then you have Vin Diesel's Riddick kind of narrating, introducing himself, and you know the waking up in cryo sleep, how he can't really sleep in cryo sleep because he's too much of an animal.
Well, you mentioned before that there's a lot of the script that hit the cutting room floor on this. Riddick's obviously explored in later films. Talk about it another day, of course, maybe.
Well, this was always intended as a standalone film.
But there was so much depth written into the core script. Riddick being a Furian is mentioned in the script, not in this movie. And that's only mentioned actually in any explanation in later films. So you end up with a kind of film that's being more mysterious than I think it originally intended to be. But I think that works to its advantage. And I think maybe, in a way, over-explaining things is maybe one of the reasons you might critique the later films of this series, because I feel like the mystery and the ambiguity of Riddick is part of his charm in this film.
Yeah.
And I like the other films. We'll get to those another day maybe. But in this film, I think the charm of Riddick is his mystery and his interactions with the young boy, girl in disguise. Yeah, Jack as a character interacts with Riddick in really subtle ways where he's telling a story that I believe the script knew wasn't true. But again, it's set up almost unintentionally for the later movies. And again, but that's because they told this story, which was, again, as you say, an individual movie on its own, sitting here, so well, it justified sequels almost. Like when they've got when the ship's going down, this is one of the first things that occurred to me when I was rewatching it, is their stuff they're saying on the bridge makes sense.
Yes.
And I feel, often, even in newer films, it's gibberish. Total gibberish. And like when she ejects the back kind of engines of the ship and the cargo off the back of the ship, and her kind of
her co-pilot,
the navigator. I think it's more like the navigator, but it's uncertain. I mean, either way, he's like, "Did you just dump car?" I can't remember the exact phrase he says, but it's believable. All the lingo they're saying, you understand because it's broadly written and well designed, but it's delivered really well as well.
Absolutely. The first 5 minutes of this film is like an adrenaline jab, you know? It's riveting and it's shocking, and It's really well paced as well, and I just love the bridge of this ship.
Yeah.
I just love how industrial it is, how tactile it is. You know, there's no glowing monitors or holographic images.
No.
It all feels very, you know, truckers in space kind of thing.
Absolutely. I think on the bit where she's having to, there's a jam on one of the flaps trying to slow the ship down, and her co-pilot navigator is like, no, we're not dumping the people, and he jams the ability for her to basically
jettison them.
jettison them, and then
Because she was so easy just to sacrifice the whole crew, or sorry, the whole cargo, all the passengers, to make sure she survives.
Yes, and there's a selfishness that's driven out of hopelessness and fear, because she's obviously, it's human, and that moment of cowardice sets her arc up magnificently, and
Well, yeah, because she immediately starts to feel the guilt. Like, once they crashed on the planet and the survivors are all coming up and putting their hand on her shoulder and saying, thank you, you've saved our lives.
and then she finds the navigator co-pilot dying. It's really him who's the hero that saved them, because he refused to let her kill them.
Yeah.
And then you've got, it's just really well thought out. And again, it sets up a conversation between kind of Riddick and her as characters all the way to the close, about valuing the crew under her command.
Well, it's because her navigator screams out, don't you pull that handle!
Don't touch it! Don't you touch that handle! Leave it alone. Get out of him!
And Riddick, who doesn't sleep during cryostasis, which everyone else is dead asleep, and he obviously, the monologue explains, I don't sleep, because it's like the primal part of your brain stays awake when you cryosleep.
But
Riddick himself,
he learned from Fry that, you know, she tried to sacrifice him as well.
Yeah.
You know, it was Johns who puts two and two together and realizes that she tried to kill everybody to save herself. And when she confesses it to him, that's when Riddick kind of cuts a piece of her hair and smells it. And you're just like, you know, Riddick at this point has been set up as the monster, as the villain of the film. You know, we're told he's a prisoner. We've told he's killed people. You know, and Johns, you know, he comes across as this dutiful police officer that's doing his job to make sure,
Marshall style, hunting down
exactly,
the
to bring this
criminal.
villain back into justice. And I like that setup. Like, the first time watching the film, you're like, you believe this blue collar guy, you know, he's got that look in his eyes. He looks like he's the real deal. He's doing the right thing.
And credit to the actor again. I think the cast in this, Riddick does steal the show, and I think it's the writing of Riddick combined with Vin Diesel's just
It's the fact
bubbling. He's a surface bubble. It reminds me of Mad Max Fury Road with Tom Hardy saying almost nothing for that film. And it's again the anti-hero. They are really good comparisons, because there's ironically a female lead who you're more following, but there's a secondary lead in the form of these kind of the stories are different. They're driving from different themes, but the way they kind of, you're never quite sure how loyal they are to each other. But in both cases, they are allied forces of good.
Sure.
Conflicted at times, a little selfish at times, a little psychotic at times, but generally a force of good.
Yeah.
Riddick is a killer. He's not afraid to kill. But in this particular case, nobody really poses a threat. And I mean, I think that's the thing with the Marshal.
But Riddick imposes an implied threat thanks to Johns establishing him, and we do get that sequence of watching Riddick escape himself, where he dislocates his shoulders and brings his arms up around him, which of course Vin Diesel was doing that actually himself. There is a little bit of CGI trickery because apparently he couldn't do it with the cuffs, but he could dislocate and relocate his shoulders almost on a whim. And it makes for a very striking visual as well, because you kind of see how it makes him feel indestructible.
It does give you an
like
idea.
Nothing can stop him.
And the original script does touch on this, because it explains that him being almost a subspecies of human, where he is somewhat faster, stronger, sees in the dark version of a human being.
And so this is what terrifies all the rest of the surviving crew, that are kind of terrified that there's this serial killer out there now that's going to hunt them. And then, you know, they see the shadows moving, somebody's coming towards them, and they freak out, and they accidentally kill another survivor from the wreck.
Because that's killed by...
And then I love that shot where you just have Riddick sat up on the background, just drinking away.
Yeah, Zeke. That was it. Zeke.
Yes.
Zeke. There's several other actors in this of note. There's Jack, who's the girl played by Rihanna Griffith. There's Zeke and Shazza Montgomery. I know, I don't... They never say anything.
Relative of yours?
Yeah, I know. when you look at the credits, they have full names and stuff.
Yeah.
And it's never said in the film. And I part of me loves that because it shows there was a deep passion for the script writing. And whoever went and wrote this was writing it so deep and layered that they wanted to explore these, or at least it wasn't set up for sequels, but in a sense it was set up as an echo of being a sequel in a series that would have gone on.
Right.
Being Aliens 3, as you said. But again, you've got Shannon and Zeke, who are the two settlers. Zeke is the one who shoots the guy who comes up to the side of the shuttle. He's also, at the same time, there's the other notable character who's the English arts trader, antiquities trader,
Alcoholic.
Yeah, alcoholic, but he trades sort of high-grade alcohols across the galaxy. He comments at some point about when he's regretting travelling on this particular shuttle because he should have paid for first class. And again, he's sort of an austere gentleman, but a bit of a douchebag.
He seems more interested in his alcohol.
He wants receipts for everybody because he's clearly driven by the money, but you're sort of rooting for everyone to get through it because the really cool thing about this is there's such an eclectic cast. You've got Australian actors, because the main actress is Australian.
Well, the whole film was filmed in the South Australia, in the desert, which isn't actually as hot as the film makes it out to be. It was actually pretty cold, and so they had to spray all the actors to keep the consistent look of them being overheated.
Yes.
It's also interesting that it's 59 minutes into this film before it becomes pitch black.
Yes.
It takes its time, and that is one of the things that I really like about the film, is that you have that opening catastrophic destruction, loss of lives, crashing on the planet, figuring out where they are, what's going on, how are they going to survive, watching Riddick escape, watching these interactions, watching these characters unfold. Even on my 10th, 20th viewing of this film, I still find it really compelling and really interesting. One of the things that really has irked me, even from my first viewing of the film, is some of the stylistic choices of the film, which even today, when I see them, I'm just like, it really irritates me when, the planet's visuals of the extreme amount of sunlight, the 3 suns, it's in a tri-star system. I really detest the lighting effects that they used here, because everything just seems washed out and bland, and it just has that look, like it almost looks like they've been superimposed into this world because of the extreme lighting that they've created.
There's also a filter moment where she looks at one sun and then the other. As I said, that filter, I see what they were doing, but I didn't absolutely love it.
No, I don't like it at all.
Because it was really strange, because there was a different hue of light.
It just washes out all the colour. And, I know that's the effect they're going for to illustrate this alien planet. But there was also several times during the crash that they used an effect that warped the image so that it was extremely stretched. And they used that several times throughout the film. And every time they do it, it immediately takes me out of the experience, because I'm just like, oh, you've just reminded me that I'm watching a film. And that you've stretched the film to give this kind of panicked state, or this hyper, state of consciousness that the characters are in or undergoing at the time. Illustrating in a film like that, I just really hated the editing in the film during certain sequences when they jump cut multiple times, then stretch the image whilst it was washed out. It's just like, it's really ugly. And even on repeat viewings, the more times I see those bits, the more I really hate them.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. The first half, character development-wise, so few horror films give you no jump scares, no real. You've got human threats.
Yes,
and that's the trick.
Well, that's what this film does well.
Yeah, it switches the threat.
Yeah,
which a few films do, and I'm trying to remember a really good example of one. I think it's another horror film. I just can't think off the top of my head. But it's the ability to go from a human threat to a alien threat back to a human threat and keep bouncing between the two, because especially in the latter half, you do get human conflicts that have been set up in the first half of the film.
Yeah.
Now, I think there's a lot going on in the first half of the film, and a lot of the B cast who are being killed off as the story goes on.
Well, it's Ezekiel who's the first one to disappear, and again they did the stretched effect as he gets pulled into this tunnel, which he, moved the sand away from to see what was inside.
Yeah.
And they all blame Riddick.
Yeah, and
Riddick explains it wasn't him that did it. There's something else you need to be worried about.
And so Carolyn believes him, and then she goes off to investigate.
Yes, they said so. Fry decides, to harness herself in and go explore these tunnels. And she doesn't quite get to see the monster, but as an audience, you can see the silhouette of
on
something
the wall. Actually,
moving
the
around
first time
behind
you
her.
see it, and it is in perfect. And again, that's a good not jump scare because you kind of you finally focus on the creature, and it's well done in a sense. There's only you do get a sort of jump scare with the foot.
Yes.
Because once you confirm Zeke didn't get killed by Riddick, he just gets dragged down a tunnel and torn to pieces. You kind of then get this creature on a wall where she's standing in this tunnel.
Again, it reminds me of Aliens when the Marines move into the nest and then the creatures start moving and they're not aware of it moving.
Yeah. Now, the more you compare it to Aliens, you see where they drew a chunk of the inspiration.
Oh,
for this.
absolutely, yeah.
But the creatures themselves are like a hammerhead flying raptor. I think that's the best.
I think that they are called bioraptors.
That would make sense. And you see different evolutions of them through the film, and that you mentioned prior, which I didn't read anyway, which was that was cut from the script a little bit.
Well, there was in the extended script, there was a full explanation of the ecosystem and the life cycle of these creatures, which you don't get any of really in the film. You kind of have to theorize about how the aliens evolved to become the dominant life form on this planet, because there is a sequence when they find the boneyard. It's just this giant creature that's been, it's just a skeleton remaining.
And then they zoom out and you see loads of them. You're like,
and so you're like, so what did this? So, I'll just go off on a tangent now, and you could say that maybe this alien creature was indigenous to this planet, and that we find out every 22 years the planet is shrouded in darkness for an extended period of time. And you're like, okay, so this planet is barren. It doesn't get much rain,
except when
there's nightfall. That's the only time it rains. You're like, that's not enough to sustain life on this planet. So how has this creature survived, considering it's also has an extreme allergic reaction to light of any kind, actually hurts and can kill the creature. So it's like, how did they evolve to become the dominant life form on this planet? And my biggest theory is, kind of like Alien, is that something or someone introduced that alien, the Bioraptor, to this planet, which did what it did. It consumed everything.
And they almost go into stasis because they've got to wait so long because of the cycle of the planet. It's
either that, or, like the script was going to explore, there is an entire ecosystem that's occurring underneath the planet's surface. So even though these monsters, I want to call them aliens, but they're not. But maybe not. There's an entire ecosystem going on, so you don't know what other creatures are lying inside the planet. All we get to draw upon is what we see and what we witness in the film, as it illustrates to us that these creatures will also eat each other for sustenance.
And maybe there's something going on again in ecosystems you don't fully understand. But again, I think this plays into it, as I said before, the advantage that this film has is the mystique, the mystery, the need. There is no need to answer these questions. These people simply want to survive.
Yes.
They're not like, we did. There's no convenient, highly skilled biologist just to my left. Could you explain what's going on? Well, yes, of course I can explain what's going on. And just like, allow me to explain with my several PhDs in random appropriate science.
Right.
And again, we've seen all the films at all the times where you have the strangely overqualified cast members just pop up and go, well, now you need the information. Exposition. And it's just like, oh, well.
Yeah.
And it's a bit awkward because you almost, and that's you see the clunk of the script at that point.
Right.
The script is requiring someone, so they appear. In this, you have settlers, pilots, a bounty hunter and his prisoner, an arts dealer.
Yeah. All they need to know is that those things are incredibly dangerous and very hostile, and you don't want to be near them. That's all you need to know.
And I talked about Riddick for some of that. But again,
it does. This sequence does set up my favorite jump scare in the whole film. Though, is she sees these shadows. She's seen Ezekiel. She's trying to climb out. She's screaming for help. Jack hears her. They manage to pull her free, and she's yelling at them like, "There's something down there. It nearly got me." And it's at that moment that the creatures have yanked on the cable and slam her back down and almost get to her before they cut her free. And I was like, that was a very effective jump scare, because you've had the horror moment and then you're almost literally pulled right back into it.
Whatever it is, it got Zeke and it nearly got me.
Yeah, I mean, the whole nature of this film is quite subtle in its horror use. It's a definite, I mean, the later films of the series aren't so horror themed. They're more actiony with a dash of horror. This film is a true horror film. I think Pitch Black is brilliant for these. subtlety. I keep saying this about the film, and I agree with you. I think the greatest weakness is the lighting, but there's very few other things I could pick at.
I actually like the lighting during the nighttime stuff, because I like the fact that when they have to make their own light sources, all of the rest of the frame is shrouded in darkness, and you can occasionally see the creatures moving in the shadows.
You can divide that film into two, which is the first half is oversaturated, the second half is perfect.
Yeah. So following the story, they've realised that, you know, the eclipse, you know, the solar eclipse, whatever sort of eclipse it is occurring. They don't know how long it's going to last.
They've lost a few people along the way, because we've lost a few of the kids, and obviously also Zeke. He gets killed.
But they also find an abandoned station, a research station, where they find the skeletons, the remains of those that are kind of in an underground tunnel leading to...
And it looks like they were burrow, trying to get Earth cores. Maybe they're a mining operation.
Yes.
You're never quite sure. It's not, again, it's not explicitly stated, because it's sort of not important. But you do get the core samples mentioned at one point by Fry when she's looking over and she sees the dates. And from the dates, there's a beautiful little planetary solar system model. And the model just sets up, and it's like, oh, crap. The date that these last samples were taken line up with this, and it's a solar eclipse.
And so then the survivors realise that they need to go back to the crash ship, get the power cells, and bring them to this shuttle so that they can escape the planet. But they also realise that the equipment that they're using is all solar powered.
and they're made to wait because Jay Jones, our apparent copper, who was revealed that around this point isn't a copper, he's a mercenary bounty hunter, and he's lying, and he's tricked. Well, he's trying to trick Riddick into working with them, so he can then recapture him when they're leaving the planet, because he wants the bounty, and he's worth twice his value alive. So he's not trying to set up Riddick to be killed, but he's a ruthless and rather unpleasant man. And his arc's quite nice, because you don't really reveal he's a drug addict. And I mean, I think that maybe they lay it on a little thick, but he turns out to be addicted to a drug that's a painkiller that he could have given to the dying co-pilot right at the start of the film, and that obviously pisses Fry off a fucking treat, because she was guilt-ridden about this man who clearly was a nobler heart than she was in her eyes.
Right.
So you end up with this kind of twist, which is people begin to trust Riddick a bit more than they do the bounty hunter, and I think the original script wasn't written with Riddick as such a main role in this. I mean, and he kind of... Vin stole the show, shall we say.
Oh, absolutely,
The main character is Fry to a great extent, and it's her story. But these two men who are sort of moral...
Having a power trip as well.
Yeah, there's a
history between them as well. Obviously, Riddick was at some point caught by this man. So, you know, you've got to see that Johns is very capable if he's managed to bring down Riddick once before.
Johns is a you kind of see that moment where they're kind of standing off, and he's saying no shivs, because clearly Riddick is a knife man.
Yes.
And he's revealed later in the film when he's fighting one of these monsters, he actually can go toe-to-toe with one.
Yeah. But there is a great sequence when they decide to work with each other, and he has the gun on Riddick. Then Riddick managed to get the gun and turns it on him, and they're just like, remember this moment. We could have killed each other.
And they both say it to each other, and it's an echo moment. It's so good.
Yeah. There's lots of nice little character moments like that.
I want you to remember this moment. The way it could have gone and didn't. Yeah.
And so let's get to the eclipse.
Well,
It actually happens. It's
so...
a fantastic visual of watching the planet rising up and blotting out the sun, and watching the darkness wash over our characters, and then the eruption of the creatures bursting up out of the ground.
And Riddick, just only one who can see it, just like,
yeah.
And it's just because Riddick has the goggles. For the first half of the film, he pretty much wears goggles. He keeps wearing them afterwards, like a cool man wearing shades inside. But he took them off, and he just looks, and you see through him, because you see through Riddick's eyes. This is kind of what, again, the second half of the film does the visuals better, and the cinematography so much better, because it has the kind of night vision of Riddick now and then, and where you see a kind of blue, flickery, kind of lightning-like outlines of things in the dark.
Right.
The aliens have a slightly different vision.
Yes.
They've done that cleverly, so you know when an alien's watching and Riddick's watching.
It's almost like the aliens can only detect movement.
Yeah, because Riddick says that to one of the kids. They're just like, don't run, don't run. It's just like, and then one of the kids runs and dies. And that's before the nightfall.
I have to say that the creatures are incredibly effective killing machines.
The way one just flies past and cuts one of the kids in half.
Yes, I was like, that impact, I was like, that's incredible. Like, it's been a long time since I've seen an alien creature that can just kill you on impact, to tear you in half like that.
Yeah.
And even Claudia Black's death. Yeah, it's so memorable because, you know, she's running to get back to the ship. Her and Riddick dive down. The creatures fly over them. She panics and gets up and continues running, and the creatures pick her up, cut her in two, and cut the top half of her away while she's still screaming. And like that's had a lasting kind of memory of the film.
Well, and again, it's when Jones finally gets his comeuppance, because Jones is the villain of the piece, and he eventually, when they're walking through the darkness, I think they've lost the Englishman at this point, because he's the only person who makes the stereotype, oh my god, we're all gonna die. He just runs off into the dark.
It is a great visual there, where he's just sat there, the lights diminishing. He takes one last drink, and he's just like, oh, I've never even been to France. He spits out the fireball, and that burst of light illuminating all the creatures surrounding him. I was like, oh, that's amazing. And then the lights go out.
Yeah, it is really well. It's all really well set up. And I mean, I loved that whole sequence. And I think, as I said, every character had a meaningful death. You felt sad for them.
Yes.
Even except Jones.
I mean,
Johns,
yeah.
Because his death is, just prior to that, he's basically saying we need to feed one of the people to the monsters and use it as bait to keep them away from us. Yeah. And Riddick's like, sure, we'll do that. And this is a Riddick trait you see through later on as well, where he plays on the worst aspects of people's character.
Yes.
And then acts almost as a justicar, an adjudicator, as judgment for them. It's just like, no, we're going to do what you said, but you're not going to
turn it around on you.
You're the bait, son. And he essentially he kicks Jones's ass in the final standoff, and it's a good fight. And I feel like it's well done enough that Johns appears as a formidable fighter to Riddick. And this kind of, again, it doesn't compromise the characters. Often enough, you always feel like plot armor exists for characters.
Sure.
And I feel like there is no plot armor in this. They do well at keeping you a little unpredictable on who's going to die. The kid's dying and the old man living isn't conventional. Normally, the priest will die, he'll die for his flock, but his flock dies. That's a bit counterintuitive. I know there was a script change at the end, but we'll get to that in a moment. But you've kind of got the rest. Sure, outside of the main cast, you can kind of go, oh, how many people are going to survive this? It does walk away more than one survivor in this. And I think that's a little unconventional in this sort of sci-fi horror film, except you can say Aliens did have the same number, 3 walk away at the end.
Well, yeah, I mean, I can imagine if this was Alien 3, then the 3 survivors would have been Ripley, Hicks, and Newt.
But it would have been almost a little tongue-in-cheek that was the case. And again, you're right, though. It would have felt like that, or if it wouldn't have been Hicks, if you would have killed Hicks in the
finale of the
you would have switched him out for a third actor, male or female. But anyway, this is a film about aliens, but not those aliens. No xenomorphs in this party. So you essentially, I think it's not. I like this film because I think there is a kind of breaking of predictable outcomes. I mean, it's hinted that Riddick is a pilot, because Johns foreshadows that he killed a pilot to escape before.
Sure.
So he knows how to pilot things, so the pilot should be afraid of him. In actual fact, that's obviously completely false in the sense that Riddick never intends to hurt her. But they make a switcheroo at the end, because obviously you've killed your way through most of the cast by this point. Johns is pretty much the most. He's the last major character to die of the show.
Yeah. Well, Johns dies.
She dies at the. Oh yeah, sorry.
And then one of the other students gets pulled away by one of the creatures because the light's diminishing. Riddick turns up and then forces Fry and the other two sort of into like a cave system. Puts a rock in front of the entranceway and then leaves them there.
Yes.
Fry kind of decides she needs to go and make sure that Riddick doesn't escape and leave them behind. She gets to the ship, powers it up, and then Riddick's like, all right, let's just get the hell out of here.
He's waiting because he's carrying there's 5 power cells that he's dragging that weigh what was described as a metric ton. But Riddick, being the super soldier, as it were, is just dragging them through the desert on his own, under no protection from all these monsters.
Powers up the ship as well, and it would almost seem like he is also just ready to take off and leave.
And he plays it like that.
Yes.
And he's just like, don't you want to leave? And she's just crying. She's like, we'll have some fun. And there is a foreshadowing, like, hey, we'll have fun flying through space. A bit romantic almost. I'm not sure he's playing the seductor, but he is playing the kind of moral seductor. It's like, you're gonna go? We can just leave them. It
definitely feels like he's testing her. Even though, like, on the first viewing, I wasn't quite sure. It's only on repeat viewings I'm like, he's definitely testing her.
Yeah, because of the moment from the very first. This is where there's script changes, I'm sure.
Yes.
And this is where you have to pick a little bit apart. Because in the opening, it's his monologue that gives you any idea that he can hear what's going on that ship.
Right.
So he can hear her having a conversation with her co-pilot. And he knows she was ready to cut them all loose. but the co-pilot was the hero. Now he's in the bit where she is admitting her sins to John's, where he's ready to stab her because he's like, the bitch is going to leave me to die.
Right.
He doesn't though, because she kind of confesses in front of John's, and he's like, and that's where, as you said, he took the cut of her hair and sifted it. And it's just like, he's a survivor. And he respects a survivor, I think. This is the thing with Riddick. And it's something explored in the other films as well. And maybe in the expanded script, which must have had a lot of that sucked out and put into the other films.
Sure.
It's hard to talk about this without mentioning other films because so much of it's referenced in this film, especially in the expanded information I've dug into. You keep going, oh, well, that's referenced in the next film. And his all these factors, like where he lies about how he got his eyes, and that's referenced tied into the next film. It's just really well put together. The bit where she's crying, it's raining as well, which is, I like the aesthetic choice. Again, I don't know how this planet works. Where's this water hiding all this time?
Right.
But it's raining, and you've got her kind of crying, and he's just carrying her onto the ship. It's like, yeah, we're gonna live. And then she suddenly snaps and goes, "No, I won't. I'm the captain. I'm not leaving any of my crew behind."
It's one of my favourite moments in the whole film because you've been on this journey with her, and you felt her remorse and her guilt, and she's trying to keep it together. But she just can't go on.
No, and he's like, "Will you die for them?" Yes.
She kind of has a moment to register like exactly what he's saying, and kind of really, you believe it's a genuine response as well. And she does take Riddick and goes and rescues them and brings them back.
This is both their arcs, almost kind of. This is where both their arcs are in full flow. You do genuinely care about both these characters because Riddick finishes with just a single word: interesting. And he helps her. Because Riddick isn't selfish. He's just driven by kind of a need to survive, but he wants to... Riddick is apparently selfish, and I think it's echoed in the expanded writings on the character, but he is a survivor.
Yeah.
He's the last of his people. He's
been screwed over by again you're going into the expanded.
It's hard to not talk about it because
he's damaged goods, psychologically, physically,
he's the last of his kind.
Yeah.
He's a badass without comparison. He's been locked up in the highest.
Even without all of that extra expanded
he
stuff,
delivers all that in this film.
He was fascinating enough to make you want to go and explore.
And this is where the plot change happens.
Yes. In the original script, Riddick was supposed to sacrifice himself to make sure that the others got onto the ship and flew away. It's like typical kind of anti-hero stuff, he's villainous throughout, but then does the right thing at the end. But because of Fry's character arc and the way that she's been developed, it's also quite shocking because she's had that change of heart. She cares about human life other than her own. That once she's got the others on the escape jet, and she goes back to rescue Riddick, who we can hear screaming in pain because he's fighting these creatures.
Yeah, he's the only one who can stand against them, but he's getting overrun because they're infinite, and he's only so badass.
Right. But she manages to pick him up and carry him back to the ship. And he's just like, wow, you're willing to die for me? And she's like, no, not you.
No, she picks him up and says, I didn't promise I'd die for you. That was the line.
Right.
And it's just like... And that's the bit where Riddick says nothing. Again, it's Riddick not saying much is the beauty of this film. And at that point, she's murdered brutally.
Well, yeah, we don't even see really what happens. There's just kind of a sound of flesh tearing.
You see her pulled into the dark, and you see
Riddick.
Riddick.
But that's all you see. It's just her being pulled away.
And him say a single line, which is not for me.
Yeah.
Because he doesn't want her to die. Because there is a mutual respect, and this is the beauty of the way they write all the Riddick films. I think is there's a poignant sadness to Riddick. And maybe that's I'll grumble about the second one another day, but I feel they over embrace that in some of the other films. But in this film, he kind of staggers back to the ship and flies off with rescuing Keith David's Imram and the girl Jack, which the two escape, and there's kind of a gentle poetry. It's like Riddick died on that planet. And that becomes a bit of a running gag for the series because Riddick always is trying to disappear, but the universe won't let him.
No, there's a very nice bounty on his head.
Yeah, he's made a lot of enemies.
It's again another great vista of space as they're flying away into the unknown, and you're just like, wow, those are great characters. As soon as the film ends, you're like, I want to go find out what happens next. It's very open ended that way.
Yes.
Where if they'd killed Riddick off and it was just the other three survivors, you'd be like, that's fine.
Yeah, I mean, Jack had a kind of hero complex of Riddick. She wanted to be like Riddick because he was so independent, strong. She was a girl trying to conceal that she was a girl to keep herself safe. And in a sense, you kind of get this powerful role model for her of Riddick. And I think without Riddick being alive at the end of the film, it wouldn't have been a story you could have gone anywhere with hers. In the later film, they explore.
Well, it's the reason why they decided to keep Riddick alive and kill off Fry
I think
instead.
it makes-
It was because
yeah.
once they got to the end of the film, they were just like, Riddick's a lot more interesting than you, Fry. So we're going to change it.
Yes and no. I think Riddick's more interesting in lore terms, but I think as plots, the arcs of the two characters, the way they both wrap up, if you'd had the roles of whose death died where, it's Riddick finding his humanity, which I think it isn't overly explored, but it's sort of Riddick has lost faith in humanity. He doesn't believe anyone will do anything for him, and nobody deserves his respect. But in this case, she earns his respect. So she coming back for him and dying for him sort of wakes that humanity in his heart.
Yeah.
And in her case, where she's not prepared to die for anybody at the start of the film, and then literally dies martyr-like at the end of the film, saving 3 people's lives. So essentially saved Riddick as the third person. The whole 3 cast all thank her for being alive, even though Riddick sort of went and helped her save the other 2. But you kind of, if she walked away at the end of it, there wouldn't have been a kind of, I think, the moral lesson punch. If we kind of ignore Riddick, and her story arc is better her dying.
Yes, I agree. It's still just a little bit disappointing because like you start to root for her when she has that change of heart.
And there's almost a little bit of romance between 2 characters. A little bit. No, I mean,
I
it's
think
not
I don't know if it
sexual.
was romance, just maybe an attraction.
An attraction, but no, but it was so subtle that you kind of wanted them to be together. Because in a partnership, they seem to be great allies. I mean, and again, it's more platonic. I wasn't saying sexual, although I think Riddick was being sly when he was trying to seduce her onto the ship. Vin Diesel playing his charisma card, but and he was playing the kind of devil's advocate. So I think you can just leave. We could just leave. But I think there was a kind of chemistry because he is kind of stalking her for most of the film.
Yeah.
And he is curious about her because she's another survivor. And I think Riddick is lonely. He's looking. Not for sex. That's oversimplifying. I think there is a kind of, it's echoed in all the films that he is terribly lonely, even though he does it to himself because he's lost so much. Like a good anti-hero, he's layered in the sense that it's just like, I don't want to lose anything else, so why would I get attached to anyone? And the moment he does even get a little bit attached to someone, they're normally going to die. Yes. Which is maybe arguably the overkill of this plot of the series of films, not this film itself, but all the films sort of just like, oh, you care for this character, oh, there's blood everywhere. Yeah, so I love this. I just love the ending. I think it is an improvement over the original write-up. I'm in a sense sad they couldn't both survive because I did think she
potential for her character to be explored.
I would have been interested about her kind of development because you don't get their backstories beyond who they are by their actions, which is in many ways the better way to tell a film because if you have to have tons of exposition about where they grew up, what part of the world they grew up in, who their parents were, how often their dad beat them. I mean, it becomes a little bit weighty on time and waste the film. I think in the first half of the film they were clever enough to give all the characters a good amount of breathing space to be themselves.
Absolutely.
So it is more obvious who the the B cast and the A cast are, but not too obvious. Because like I said, Jack is kept in the background a lot of the time for the first half of the film until the point where, we didn't mention until now, Riddick turns and goes, the girl's bleeding. And just like, Fry says, no, I'm not cut. And no, the girl, he looks over Fry's shoulder to Jack. And it's just like, he's known all along she's a female because remember, he can smell, again, the opening monologue, he has a heightened sense of smell. So he's like, I can smell the female there and I can smell the male there. And you're just like, oh, okay, this guy's OP.
Again, it's just more interesting characters. They're not just fodder. They are, you get a sense that they are people.
Yes, and I feel...
And that makes you care when horrible things are happening around them or to them. Yes. And that's the key. It's always the key to a good horror story.
You need to make me care for the people you're murdering.
Not for me. Not for me.
Well, Jess, what are your favourite or most memorable scenes from Pitch Black?
I think the second half of the film is, by and large, the better. But the boneyard sequence, when Riddick just looks down and sees where all the settlers, miners' remains are, that's just a nice reveal because the camera pans down quite smoothly. And I think, again, that from the first half, it's the bit where there's a monster on the wall behind her, when she's in the tunnels. The second half, there's so many death sequences. I think we're all happy when Johns gets it because he gets his head bitten clean. It's tragic when others die, like you said. I think your favourite scene you mentioned with her being pulled up in the sky.
Yeah.
But outside of that, I would probably say the last sequence. I actually quite like the sequence at the back. It's not a violent sequence. It's the sequence between Fry and Riddick before she goes back, makes them go back to rescue them.
Yeah.
Because I think it's the culmination of everything of that film, and I think it's the non-violence. Well, it's Riddick still being, she tries to attack Riddick, and he's like, "Nah, I'm Riddick." Pins her, and he then demands the truth from her, and it's just like, yeah, this is a really, really good sequence. And obviously, the second sequence that ties to that, most importantly, is her death, which is a bit heartbreaking because again, it's that Riddick. There is a connection between them because she came back for him, and she respects him and he respects her. And as I said, platonic friendship might be the word I'm looking for.
You didn't answer.
Yes, I would, Riddick. I would die for them.
What about yourself?
I think my absolute favourite sequence is her confession to Riddick at the end. Her character arc coming full circle, making the decision to go back and rescue
we
them.
both say that because it's a horror film. And I mean, most of the time we talk
well,
about horror
because
films.
it's the most human,
but you're right. And that's something...
And she's laying everything kind of bare, she's exposed herself.
Absolutely, but I think this is the thing that a lot of horror films don't do right. It's the human part is sometimes more important than the monster. The monster can look cool.
Well, the monster's there to destroy that humanity.
It's a tool to challenge your morality.
Absolutely,
and I think this film is a personification of a horror film that doesn't need to be the creature feature, because the creature is the main star of the show. Mm-hmm. It's the humans, the actors. These two actors just nail it. Yeah. I'm sorry, anything else?
But of course, when I think of Pitch Black, I also remember Claudia Black's death. I remember the guy Paris and him breathing the fire and seeing all the monsters surrounding him.
That was
just a great visual.
Cinematography-wise, that looks fantastic.
And I think one of my favourite visuals in the film as well is when Riddick is standing toe-to-toe with the creature and he's mimicking its movements from side to side, and the creature just can't visualise him. And Riddick unfortunately gets screwed over because another creature lands behind him, and then he's got to fight, and that's when he gets screwed over. I've said before, my weakest aspect of the film is some of the visuals, the stretched images and quick cuts, and some of the CGI is looking a little bit dated and rough around the edges here.
There were budgetary cuts to it,
There's a sequence when the creatures are flying overhead, and then they're bleeding down on our survivors, and they're like, what the hell is that? Like, they're killing each other up there.
And
some of the creatures land next to them, and I'm like, just the dust being kicked up, the lighting didn't look right. It looked like some of the creatures were dissolving into the ground. I know the light that they were carrying was having that effect on them, but some of it just looks ropey and rushed out. Granted, I saw this on VHS. Now I'm watching it on Blu-ray, and I'm just like, like, it looked better 20 years ago than it does now.
It doesn't age terribly as a whole film, but you're right. Certain sequences almost need a remaster, and I say that lightly, because the Star Wars remasters, as a terrible example of the most well-known, aren't all that great. You don't want to compromise the original vision, but I do feel like the space sequences hold up. A lot of the CGI from a distance, and especially when you're seeing it through the alien's eyes or Riddick's eyes, holds up. But all in all, I think the scenes when you've got the swarms and not in infrared are an issue, because I think the bit where Riddick sees them all pouring up into the sky, you're like,
I'll say it was very good for 2000,
Absolutely.
On the budget that it was.
Well, it was a mid-range film budget. It had some cuts by the sounds of it, if you dig through the kind of history behind the film, and it still did solidly. I mean, the film held up on its own.
Well, do you recommend Pitch Black?
Oh yes, it's probably one of my favourite sci-fi horror films. And I haven't mentioned one sci-fi horror film that's on the top of my list, which is Event Horizon, but it's not Event Horizon by a country mile, but it's definitely sitting in that midfield of great action horror. It is reminiscent of Aliens.
Yes,
it is more low-key and low-budget than Aliens, because it hasn't got the kind of Marine Corps, oorah, gun-blazing battles. I think it would have taken away from it. This is a better film in the sense that it finds the writer understood, and we've got to reference back to Alien. It was meant to be an Alien 3 potential sequel. It is a balance between Alien and Aliens.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't go over the top like Aliens did, which I love, but it's like you lower the horror when everyone's blazing bullets and blowing up half the building. You're not quite so scared. No. Light them up, boom, and then boom, and then like you always were an asshole, boom, and it's like, okay, people are just committing suicide at this point with more explosives, and they're blowing it all to Kingdom Come, which is awesome. Yeah. But it detracts from the horror, which Alien just was so good. Ripley facing off against this monster face to face, and again they do it with Riddick in this one, where you have these face to face. Sure, Riddick is on a more even terms one-on-one, but there's a lot more of them, as in the Aliens reference, that he can handle as a single man. If there was just one of them, he could kill it one at a time.
Sure.
But yeah, I just honestly, one of the best sci-fi horror films I've.
Yeah,
I love it.
I'm also definitely going to be recommending Pitch Black. It has a very memorable creature, premise, and cast of characters. This was the breakout film for Vin Diesel and the character of Riddick, which has endured now for 20 years, and the stories of this anti-hero appear far from over. Pitch Black, retrospectively speaking now, serves as the start of the Chronicles of Riddick saga, and is a great introduction into that world. And its strength is that this film works as a standalone sci-fi horror. Radha Mitchell was also excellent here, and she shows a great range in her performance, the guilt of her actions, the horrors that they're facing, and her character arc felt complete, despite becoming overshadowed by Riddick's enigmatic presence. My only complaint with the film, as I've said, is the stylistic approach to certain edits and effects. The warped and stretched clips were very distracting, coupled with the quick edits. The creature effects in places also now look a little bit dated, but the creatures are well animated and convincing. They're frightening and they are threatening. The music by Graham Revell was also pitch perfect. It was creepy, tense, and captivating, and it has a memorable theme. It's a very entertaining, character-led action horror adventure that still pleases after multiple viewings, which makes this a must-watch for fans of the genre. It's highly, highly enjoyable.
Absolutely.
Thanks for watching Off the Shelf Reviews.